gap between that and the telling of your family. And that, I think, is a hard thing to come to terms with on your own. And in a certain sense, inherently, you come to terms with it on your own. So I don't really know. So that would be part of my speculation as to why there is still so much loneliness and unhappiness and suicide in gay communities. I also think it's easy to overestimate how much acceptance and tolerance there is out there in the world. In a certain sense, as gay marriage becomes a much more sort of public, visible reality, you get away with less. There are a lot of people who, in the church, right, for a long time would have just been two guys living together. And now, suddenly, they have to make a choice about who they want to be, what they want to be known as in the church. Anyway, so that's that. I'm rambling again. But I'm trying to think what I have. I'm not sure that I've seen anything that I could point to and be like, this is the way that the Catholic Church, this is the thing the Catholic Church can offer to solve that loneliness, because in a certain sense, that's not really what our vocations are for, right? It's more to find a way for our loneliness to be fruitful. This happens in marriage, this happens in the religious life. People don't stop being lonely or unhappy, but they find ways to love one another within that experience, parenting. So I guess I would more say, assume, this probably isn't true, but assume that the unhappiness level is constant. How could we offer people ways to live that out that will be life-giving for others and in service to others, loving, and that will connect them more deeply with God? That might be a cheap way of getting around the question rather than answering it. Because I mean, people really, the sheer experience of unhappiness and loneliness also really drives people away from God. That might, again, be the American thing of blaming people for suffering. Maybe that is less true in more deeply Christian cultures. I think it is one thing that potentially Catholicism can really offer is the recognition that suffering can be a path to God, as opposed to a sign that you are not in touch with God. You may be being sheltered in his wounds at that moment.
I think in thinking about the sort of physical experiences a person, even a person of faith, can have that are very sort of humiliating and sometimes very public. Addiction is something I think about a lot in that context. So I wonder if there's anything you can speak to about the sort of benefit of, because it is such a physical experience. If there's anything about the recovery process having to do with the sort of physicality and materialism that can be helpful in that context.
Yes, the question is, if we're looking for spiritual experiences in which our bodies are extremely humiliated and vulnerable and kind of gross, what about addiction? That's totally right. I think it's not only in recovery that that's true. I think the humiliation that I experienced when I was drinking, and maybe especially when I was relapsing, or not relapsing is the wrong word, but when I was trying to quit drinking and failing, the experience of persistent failure, is one path to God. That kind of inability to do the thing that you desperately both want to do and know you have to do, and the attempt to, in some way, surrender your will and your life to God when nothing seems to be changing or getting better, this is like C.S. Lewis, I think, has some line that's exactly about this, that it's in those moments that your trust is most called upon, and when you can, in fact, be much closer to God than in times when things are going right for you, and sobriety is easy, and you walk down the wine aisle and you don't even notice. You're actually further from God in that moment than you were at the moment when you were chronically failing to quit drinking and were desperate to do so, and were throwing yourself on God's mercy every day, and going back and confessing the same sins to the same priest. As long as you weren't avoiding confession, that's the thing that you actually will, that you should do. Which I totally did. That was actually probably the thing that more than anything spurred me to realize that I had to quit drinking, was realizing that I was avoiding confession for months on end because I didn't want to have to say the same thing. Recovery absolutely is a deep sort of spiritual acknowledgement of one's own weakness inability to do anything with the body or with the mind or with the spirit without God. At least this is part of what it was for me. But also, I do want to sort of throw out there that it's not only when you're getting better that the humiliation that you experience in addiction can bring you closer to God. I feel like I'm supposed to talk about St. Mark Ji Tianjing here. He's the opium-addicted saint who was martyred in the, I don't want to say in the Boxer Rebellion because I forget the exact circumstances of his death, but he was martyred during the conflicts in China around the Boxer Rebellion. He had been at that point barred from receiving communion for something like 20 years, but was willing to die for his faith, even though he had not managed, even with that faith, he had not managed to conquer opium addiction.
Yeah, I thank you, especially because to talk about the materialism of Christianity, it is easy to focus on those things that are beautiful. But it's incredibly fascinating to me to hear you talk about those things that are fragile and broken and weak as the same things. And so I thank you, and I invite the audience to thank you for being with us tonight.